Hey everyone, welcome back to my podcast, Anatomy and Physiology Bit by Bit. This is your host, Dr. Steve Sullivan, coming to you from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Philadelphia. And at the moment, I am now celebrating 23 years teaching anatomy and physiology. I started teaching A&P 2 in January of 2002 at night at Bucks County Community College as an adjunct professor. 3 years later, in 2005, also January, I was hired as a full-time tenure-track professor, and that's what I've been doing ever since. So this month marks 20th anniversary of being a full-time faculty member at Bucks County Community College, and 23rd anniversary of teaching my very first A&P course. Today we're going to start talking about the urinary system. This episode will focus on the general functions and anatomy, and then over the next couple of episodes, we'll discuss urinary function in more detail. Now, based on the Spotify comments and emails I get, most of you out there are considering a clinical field of some kind. Maybe a nurse, doctor, physical therapist, physician assistant, occupational therapist, respiratory therapist, radiology tech, sonography, the list goes on and on and on. But the common link between all these professions is that you will be helping others. Just like teachers and social workers, these are helping professions, and most of us get into them because we enjoy helping others. We want to do some good in this world, whatever that may mean to you. But doing good for others doesn't mean we can't also do well for ourselves. In fact, there is a book that I've read called Doing Good and Doing Well, Inspiring Helping Professionals to Become Leaders in Their Organizations. It was written by Dr. Michael L. Kaufman, who is a social worker but also a business executive. Recently, I spoke to today's guest, Dr. Kaufman, about his book, and I think anyone who is currently serving or aspiring to be in a helping profession should listen to our conversation and consider reading his book. So before we get into the urinary system, take a few minutes to listen to my conversation with Dr. Michael L. Kaufman, author of Doing Good and Doing Well. So, Dr. Michael Kaufman, author of the award-winning book Doing Good and Doing Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Steve. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. And first, let's have you tell us a little bit about your academic and your professional background.
Yeah, great. We were talking a little before, but I'm a Rutgers guy, proud to say. Went there undergrad, got my accounting degree. And actually, that led me to my professional degree. What would happen when I went to Rutgers is, my mother and I split the schooling. So I wanted to be an RA, and being an RA, it helped pay for half of school. And that was just a really great opportunity for me to realize if I was going to go to graduate school, I could be a resident director, which would pay for half of graduate school. And what happened in my senior year at Rutgers, I was got a job at Ernst & Young, which is one of the big accounting firms. And I started getting a feeling in the pit of my stomach that it just wasn't right for me being an accountant. I was good at it, but I didn't love it. And I was working at the Center for Cognitive Rehabilitation with patients with head injuries in New Brunswick while I was a senior. And I was like, wow, I love this. If money wasn't an option, I would do this. And my boss had an MSW. And I'm like, what the heck is that? A master's in social work. She started to tell me about it. And I'm like, gosh, this is a dream come true. So I found it right at the right time. Shifted gears. Instead of taking the job at Ernst & Young, went to get my master's in social work. And that kicked off my whole career working with kids and working with families. And I loved it. Started, in schools with regular education schools, the Newark Boys and Girls Clubs. And while I was working, I started going for my PhD and things of that nature. And I got really lucky about 25 years ago and found this company, a small company at the time, that was looking for a director of one school in Baltimore to run it, to run a school for students with special needs. And I ran that school in Baltimore, and we ended up growing that company to be about $100 million business. So I started as a director in training, worked my way up to be director, regional director, COO, CEO, president and CEO. We were sold to private equity. Went out on my own, and throughout that, I also have taught graduate school at Rutgers and all of that. So my career has really been about the helping professions, being there for kids. And as I moved forward, I realized how much I loved leadership, and that I found that, when you're a social worker, you can have a caseload of maybe 25 kids. But if you're a leadership of an organization, the caseload is all the kids that you're helping, all the families that you're serving, and all the staff that you lead. And I found that I loved motivating staff, promoting staff, and just growing a business. So it just expanded from being a helper to being a leader. And I found that those skills weren't that far apart. A lot of people, when they think of us in the helping professions, they don't think of us as leaders. They think of us as do-gooders, helpers, being people who are kind, compassionate. But I think that we're also really trained to be outstanding leaders in business too.
Yeah, I noticed that in one of your chapters, which I'm going to ask about a little bit later, you talk about the personality traits that make good leaders, and they're typically personality traits that people in helping professions already have, and it makes them
Exactly.
good at that. Definitely, I love the Rutgers background. That is also my alma mater. So we were there around the same time. We definitely overlapped for some time. So I really liked a lot of the aspects of your book in terms of making sure that people in helping professions who are doing these things because they feel kind of like a calling to do good work for society, but also doesn't mean that they have to be poor or
Exactly.
necessarily struggle day to day. And so what would you say is the primary goal of your book? Essentially, what do you
Yes.
hope a person gains from reading your book?
What I really hope somebody gets out of it is if there's a spark in you to maybe step up and lead, that this book sort of says, hey, I can do it. I went out to lunch once, or many, many times actually, with friends who are social workers, um, folks that work with clients with autism, and they're working at the agency, and they're just so frustrated with the boss. And they're like, we brought in a pharmaceutical sales guru to run the organization, or we brought in somebody with an MBA in finance to run the organization. They just don't get who we are. They're really bright. They're not a bad person, but they just don't get our mission and who we are. And I'm like, well, why didn't you throw your hat in the ring? And they'll say to me, well, I don't think I can do it. I don't know that I have the skills for it. And I'm always like, yes, you do. Like you mentioned, the personality traits, being a great listener, handling crisis intervention. You've handled all kinds of things that come your way. If you can handle that, I'm sure, somebody hearing that our profit is down a little bit, we're struggling to maintain, try to hire staff. These things are normal problems for us. We're not going to fall apart over it. We also get empathy and accountability. We get compassion and strength. We also are very familiar with key performance indicators, these terms that businesses use. We have to do charts, we have to do graphs, we have to make sure we know everything about the clients we work with. We have to be meticulous. So we already have that down. We're used to reporting up. We're humble. We have that part of us too. And we care about people. If you're going to lead an organization and you really care about your clients, you're only going to be as strong as each employee is. So I really espouse the servant leadership type of leader who says he or she we can do everything. I want to roll up my sleeves. I can mop the floor if that's what's needed. I can run the organization if that's what's needed. There's nothing that I won't do to run it. And I just want those of us in the helping professions to be able to see a bigger picture. Listen, God bless you if you want to stay in your role of helping and you don't ever want to move up to leadership. That's great. We need you. But if there's a part of you that feels like you can run something, go for it. Because I remember when we first sold to private equity in this business that I mentioned to you at the beginning, and my board was a bunch of folks with degrees from Princeton, Harvard, really high level people. And I realized, wow, they're not necessarily better leaders than me. They may understand financial statements better than me, but they're not necessarily better at motivating staff, leading staff, coming up with a vision. And they actually look to me to do that. So I walked in thinking, oh God, they're getting this board. They're really smart. They're really brilliant. Should I be looking to them? And they were like, no, Mike, you're the leader of the organization. We only are going to be as good as you are. And I think that was just such a great lesson to say, nobody knows the business better than those of us that have rolled up our sleeves to understand it. And why not? Why can't we run it?
That's a lot of really good points. I think that sometimes people in the helping professions, I'll just use that term, they get a little frustrated when they feel like the people in charge don't understand what is really happening on the ground.
Definitely, definitely. And what I love to say to people too is everyone's afraid to lose their caseload or lose their classroom. You mentioned education. I've worked with a lot of teachers that I felt could run schools, and they're like, "Well, I don't want to give up my classroom." And I'm like, "Well, how many kids in your classroom? When you're working with intense special needs, you'll have about 12 kids in your classroom." I'll say to them, "Wow, do you want to run that classroom with 12, or how about the whole school and all the students become yours?" That's how you have to look at it. If you want to make a difference with your classroom, now you can make a difference with the whole school, and you can do that. And you know what's really interesting is we hold ourselves back sometimes by just being afraid of profit and loss statements. Anyone can teach you that the art of leadership is getting in front of people, motivating them, inspiring them. The science of it is understanding the profit and loss, understanding that we need more revenue in, less expenses. So just understand the business. Like when you think about schools, and this is something I've done, is I've run schools a lot. It's the financial part we shouldn't be afraid of, right? What's the revenue? More students, more revenue. That's the top line. What's our big expenses? Payroll and rent. So if you manage payroll, you understand your rent is usually fixed, and you understand payroll, and you get more students bringing in creates more revenue, you got the financial part down. It's not that difficult. The hard thing is how do you get people to want to be teachers now instead of drive for Uber or drive for Amazon? Once Corona happened and folks were like, I don't necessarily want to go into a classroom every day and be in a room. How do we as leaders excite new teachers to come in and want to be with us? And that's where I think us in the helping professions have that ability to do that as well as anybody.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about the school example because what happens in a public school situation where more students doesn't necessarily mean more revenue, right? So if
Right.
I own my home, I pay the same property taxes whether I have one child or five.
That's
And
right.
so more students doesn't necessarily mean more revenue. So when you're in a situation where revenue is not the determinant of success or the determinant
Mhm.
of workload, then what happens, right? So,
Yeah.
but I might want to ask you about that a little bit later. But one thing I think we should probably do is let's define helping professionals.
Yes.
Like who are the helping professionals?
A great question. It's open to interpretation, but what I would assume the helping professionals, those frontline folks that are out there doing really tough work, social workers, speech and language therapists, nurses, x-ray techs, those going into homes working with the elderly, those that have to show up every day. All of us have found a calling, as you said at the beginning of our meeting, where we feel like there's something in us that wanted to make a difference, wanted to help. And a lot of times these helping professions, as we both brought up, are not ones that pay that, well either. That makes it even tougher to recruit.
Yeah, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit because we were talking about personality traits, and when I was looking at that chapter, one of the ones I really was intrigued about was the active listening part. Because I've sat down across from an administrator in the past where you can tell they're not really listening. And sometimes I don't blame them, right? They might have 100 million other things to do that their mind is on. So, what are some of the tips that you can give people to let the person they are talking to know that, yes, I am listening to you?
Great question. First and foremost, you brought it up. We all have a million things on our mind. So if you have weekly supervisions and they're set for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, is give the person that time. Don't say I got a crisis, or and if you do, like we're going to meet Tuesdays 1 to 2, is meet with them 1 to 2. Now, if a crisis comes up at 1:40, say I owe you 20 minutes. When can we do that? Those 20 minutes. So that's it, is give people time. What I also love is getting out of the norm to do a meeting. A lot of times when you do a supervision meeting, as the boss, I sit behind my desk. You come in, you sit in the chair in front of me. I love to have a little side table. I know these things are subtle, but they're huge. A little side table. We sit side by side. There's no power dynamic. Or I'll go into your office where you're behind your big desk. I'm in front of you. So I already changed the power dynamic to where you are the focal point and I'm truly listening to you. Another tip is to not speak unless you really have something to say or the person is fully done speaking. Is let them get everything out there. And what I love to do is at least once a month is to get out of the office, go get a cup of coffee, get something to eat. Sitting and talking in a place that's outside of the workplace, exactly those, no one's going to knock on your door. You put the phone down and you truly give that person the time to really listen to them and to focus on them and to care about what they have to say. There's nothing more that we can do, and what we owe is to truly listen to folks and to train ourselves on how to listen. I love to do a lot of exercises with people where we'll learn how to be better active listeners. So a lot of times, especially as a boss, you sit there and you go, I want to say something profound. So somebody says something to you and something profound comes to your head, so you just want to get it out. So we'll do little exercises of that ghost story thing of like, you'll start a story and I can't go until you're totally done with it. And then I go. So I have to wait until I hear every word that you have to say. And then I'll put something else on and the person sitting to the right of me will go and we'll take it from there. But you really want to make sure that someone's heard. And there's something I love called the sixth thing is when somebody comes to tell you something, the first thing they have to say is usually not what they want to tell you. So for instance, somebody may come to you and say, Steve, the coffee in our office is terrible. Oh, really? Tell me more about that. Yeah. John, when he puts the coffee out, it's already tastes terrible by 11. Okay, so how can we make that better? Well, it seems that you always take John's side. Then we get down to the sixth thing, which I always say is, you know what? You passed me over for a promotion and gave it to John and not me. So what I'll do is I'll push and I'll leave some opening and space for silence. So where that person can get to the sixth thing and let them get to the thing that's inside of them that's really eating at them that they have to say to you. And make sure you give the time to that person, the space to them, and then also ask, hey, we talked about this, but I think there's something still out there. This seems like an onion to me. Can we keep peeling it? So I love to use that concept with everybody of the sixth thing and try to get to that sixth thing with when someone comes to you in stress, especially.
I like that. I like those techniques a lot. I really like the desk dynamic as well. When I was in school, they said when you're going over things with the patient, don't put the desk between. It's just not a very good dynamic. And I like that you flip it
Yes,
to give them the power. I want to go back to something you said earlier about when you were in college being an RA, because I think this is something that is probably not intended, but I think is good for students to hear because what a great way to lessen your student loan burden by being an RA. When my wife and I first met, she was a graduate assistant. So she was a GA. She was an RA
yeah,
that was a graduate student at University of Pennsylvania where she was getting her PhD. And what a great thing, like to get the free living expenses and all that stuff to really lower the loan burden on students. We actually begged my son to consider applying to be an RA at the University of Pittsburgh, but he just doesn't want to. But
yeah,
either way, um, I love that idea for students. And also, what I noticed is that when she stopped being a graduate assistant, she became the college house dean, and she became the
yes.
person in charge of all the RAs and GAs at Penn. And she was still finishing her PhD, so that actually made her tuition free as well because she worked for the university. So there's so many different ways that you can use leadership roles to really help you with your academic bills as well. And it was a great environment. Plus, the community of the RAs and GAs, they made friends for life. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Steve, I'm so happy you brought this up because if I when my niece interviewed me for something for a class, she's at Tulane, and she goes, "What was the most influential thing you ever did, or what was the most important?" I would say being an RA. Absolutely on the tuition. It was amazing because I was splitting it with my mom. That was my half. But most of all, it takes you out of your comfort zone. At that age, 17 or 18, 19, especially as males, we're quieter, we're insecure, we're not as mature. It made me step up. It took me out of, again, my comfort zone. You know what I loved about it is that 24-hour work ethic that it creates. When you're an RA, somebody could be sick, They come home from a party at 2 a.m. So it got me into that mode of I'm always on call, I'm ready to go. And I just learned so much about how to deal with people, how to listen to people, how to care, and also how to motivate. The ability, and I'm sure your wife, I was exactly like her. I ran all the RAs when I was going for, graduate school. But think about a party at Friday night or trying to do a program in a dorm. How motivating, creative do you have to be as an RA to convince the students to stay with you to do a program instead of going out drinking? So it really pushed my skill set, and I learned so much from it. I wouldn't trade that experience for the world. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, it was great. In fact, my wife was a college house dean when we got married. So the first 2 years of our marriage, we lived in a dorm.
Yeah.
We had an apartment in a dorm in Philadelphia, but we lived in a dorm for the first 2 years we were married, and we weren't kids. We were in our 30s. So,
Right. And yes, and you saved money, I bet you, to buy your first house with
of
that, because that's what
course,
I did.
we lived in Philadelphia for free.
Exactly.
Yeah,
There you
it
go.
was great.
You can't beat it, right?
You buy a pair of socks, that's two socks. You buy a pair of Bombas socks, that's four socks. Because one purchased is one donated. Socks are the #1 most requested clothing item in homeless shelters. So when you buy a pair of super comfortable Bombas socks, you're also donating a pair. Bombas customers have powered over 150 million donations. So Bombas would like to thank you 150 million times. But we only have like 30 seconds. Go to bombas.com and use code AUDIO for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com and use code AUDIO at checkout.
All right, so another chapter that I want to talk about is the rise of female power.
Yeah.
Really, really interesting. And you give a lot of examples of trailblazing women like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Shonda Rhimes, and lots of other people like Sonia Sotomayor, you talked about, Beyonce, Gloria Steinem. But you also talk about the origin of nursing, which is all based on women. And so here's the thing that I was interested about because the NIH tells us that about 80% of healthcare professionals are women, which is largely because of nursing. But only 42% of people in healthcare management positions are women. So, what do you suggest we can do to close the gender gap between the people who work in healthcare and the people who run healthcare?
That's 100% why that chapter's in there. If our field and our professions are dominated by females, there should be way more female leaders. Women are just incredible leaders. They are, like the chapter says, at the forefront of nursing and all these helping professions. And there should be just more females running organizations. So that's a part of the book too. And I think in a funny way, as a male, I was like, I don't know how this chapter is going to come out. I don't want it to sound like a guy trying to speak on this in some strange way, but I think it's so important that I'm acknowledging the importance of women and women as leaders. And when I'm looking at my organizations, I want I want female leaders running them because I just feel their knowledge, their insight, how women look at emotional intelligence and intellectual intelligence and balance those two and see them as equally important, I think is a really cool skill. So I just feel for women, if you're a male who's in power, start looking to your female employees as leaders, as good, if not better than you can be, because they are. And also for the females, I would love them to say, you know what? Why have I not pushed to run this organization? Why have I let, or watched a bunch of men come in and run this organization when I'm could be way better than them? So I just feel it's really important. I was raised by my mom, so just the respect. I have two sisters. My respect of women and women in leadership and women's ability to be kind, compassionate, and strong at the same time. They can balance those things. They can be empathetic and accountable, I think, as well as anybody. So I just wanted to highlight that yeah, there's something wrong here. We got a profession or professions that are female dominated, but not dominated by leadership. And that has to change.
Yeah, and hopefully it can be simultaneously a top down and bottom up
Yeah.
change. Last thing I really want to ask about the book is chapter 9 is called "Money is Not a Bad Word," right? And you encourage people not to feel guilty for making money just because they're in a helping profession, and I agree with that. Uh, But it seems that there's a large portion, if not most, helping professionals work in the public sector or
Yeah.
in nonprofit, where it's really hard to use a bottom line to establish their worth and their value. So the examples you gave for ways to make more money or to become a leader in the field are largely entrepreneurial,
Hmm.
which is great. But most people are not going to invent some new technology or have an opportunity to open a school, which you mentioned. But I don't think that a lot of like home health aides, young teachers, nurses, social
Right.
workers, etc. I don't think they're working paycheck to paycheck because they feel guilty,
Right.
or they feel
Right.
too guilty about making more money. So
Right.
so this isn't really a question, more of like maybe you can comment on this. What can we do to convince society to pay people what they're worth or to value them, even if we can't tie their value to a revenue stream or something like that, so that we can not expect someone to do something extraordinary
Right.
just to be paid an ordinary wage so that they can live in the community they work in. If you're hired as a new teacher here in Central Bucks, you're making $51,000 a year. You cannot live in Bucks County
No.
for $51,000 a year. So you can't
No.
afford to live anywhere near your school.
Yeah. One thing that I think is that came from Corona that I think is positive is the world started to see those of us in the helping professionals as the real heroes and the banging the pots and pans and being excited for people walking down the street. So everyone started to see, okay, these people are vital, they're necessary, they're needed. One thing you brought about education, you're absolutely right. It pays 51,000. But what's great about education is they pay for classes. They pay for you to get a master's. They pay for you to get your potential PhD and school administration is to take advantage of that. But what I think is going to happen is there's going to be, especially with education, we're falling behind, or we've fallen behind the rest of the world, right? We're falling behind in trying to recruit teachers. At some point, somebody's going to have to see the value in what we pay teachers has to go up. We need to up the educational system. We need advocates on our side to discuss the value of what we do. Like you're saying, those home health aides, people want to be able to pay their bills and to be able to buy a home. And right now, everybody is scared to death. If you don't have a home, it's extremely intimidating to think of going out there trying to buy a house. I do feel it comes with education. It comes with writing books like these, doing podcasts, folks like you and I discussing it, going to the school boards, speaking up, getting our elected officials out to see schools, the programs, the hospitals, seeing what home health aides are doing, seeing how people are living a lot longer. We have to pay our home health aides more. I think there has to be more discussion. I think what happens is those of us in the helping professions are so amazing at advocating for our clients, and we are not great at advocating for ourselves. We don't advocate for ourselves at all. We want to make sure everybody's healthy, safe, and doing well. Is I just want all of us to say, what about us? And I got to push for my own salary. I need to, whether it changes through law, it changes through tax dollars, it changes through folks seeing the value. So we just have to yell it from the rooftops how important we are, how valuable what we do is, and to try to create a dollar amount that goes with it. I remember reading this great article about education and comparing it to sports and is education, the results not as good? And somebody was saying, well, I'm a big sports fan. I'm a big Jets fan, unfortunately. But on Sunday, when the Jets aren't good, Monday, every stat is in the newspaper. We know what every single player did. So there's results, and they're being held to those results. And because of that, you can then reward based on those results, and you can consequent based on those results. That what we have to do in education is get it a little bit more like sports, where there's really tangible results that we can see and that can be then rewarded for. Right now, we don't really have any type of result that we're looking for or that the world is looking at. And it just seems that we keep falling further and further behind. So we just need folks to be advocating for ourselves and the value of what we do.
Yeah, I agree. We definitely need the elected officials and the constituents to kind of meet somewhere on those things. So, Michael, how can people learn more about you and your book?
Yeah, I have a website, michaellkaufman.com. My book is on romanlittlefield.com. It's also Amazon or Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. And I'm just having fun with this. I was inspired and excited by people who believed in me maybe before I realized I had it in me. So I want to help people to see that you have it in you maybe before you realize it. And that's what this book is all about, is to hopefully spark something in those of us that want to help.
Well, I really liked it, and I will put your website in the show notes. Do you have an Instagram or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, and all of that. So, yep, you can find me there too under Doing Good and Doing Well.
Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Steve. This was great. Thanks for your time.
Once again, thank you, Dr. Michael Kaufman. I have put a link to his website, michaellkaufman.com, in the show notes, so you can see how to get his book and maybe learn more about him. I hope you got something out of that conversation. I know I did. I really enjoyed the book, and I agree that just because we aim to do good in this world doesn't mean we can't also do well for ourselves. Well, that brings us to the content for this episode, the urinary system. The urinary system is primarily known for its excretion of waste products, but it actually has several functions. We think of the urinary system as producing urine, which is a waste product that we use to also get rid of a lot of waste products that are dissolved in our urine. But the production of urine is a means of accomplishing many of those other functions. So urine production is basically what everything is rooted in, but so many things are happening while the urine production takes place. Now, since we're talking about anatomy, which is kind of hard to follow just by listening to a podcast, I'm going to post some images of the kidney on my Instagram account. So I will use images from my own dissection videos of pig kidneys, and that's what I'll post. So go to Instagram, take a look at those photos, maybe use them to follow along with this podcast so that way you can get a good feel for the explanation of urinary system anatomy. The urinary system is in the abdominopelvic cavity, and it consists of 2 bilateral kidneys that produce urine, 2 ureters that carry urine to a muscular storage chamber called the urinary bladder, and the urethra, which carries urine out of the body. Now, there's only 1 urinary bladder and there's only 1 urethra. The functional organs of the urinary system are the 2 kidneys. We often use the term renal to refer to the kidneys, like the renal artery that supplies blood to the kidney, or the renal vein that takes blood away from the kidney. Most of the functions of the kidneys are linked to urine production, while others are entirely separate functions independent of urine production. Let's talk about the functions that rely on urine production. Every minute, about 1/5 of all of your blood, that's 20%, goes through your kidneys. Every single minute. That means it only takes 5 minutes for your kidneys to filter all of your blood. The kidneys are filtering the blood and removing the toxic wastes that our cells produce. These are called metabolic wastes. One of the more important wastes to dispose of are nitrogenous wastes. These are the ones that contain nitrogen. The main nitrogenous wastes we produce are ammonia, urea, uric acid, and creatinine. About half the nitrogenous wastes that we produce are urea, which is a result of catabolism, or the breakdown of proteins into amino acids and the subsequent removal of their nitrogen groups. Those nitrogen groups become ammonia, which is converted into urea. Ammonia is extremely toxic. Urea is not as toxic as ammonia, but still we need to get rid of it. Uric acid is the result of nucleic acid catabolism, and creatinine results from creatine phosphate catabolism. Now remember, metabolism is broken up into 2 phases. Catabolism, with a CAT, that is the breakdown of a molecule, and anabolism, with AN, that is the building of molecules from other molecules. We break down nucleic acids, we break down proteins, we break down anything that we pull into our bodies. Carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, fats, they all need to be broken down with our metabolic processes. When we consume some kind of food, whether it came from plants or animals, it's going to have nucleic acids in it, DNA and RNA. So we have to break those nucleic acids down. When we do that, we get uric acid as a result. Creatine phosphate is a molecule that stores energy in muscles and other tissues. So when we consume something that is muscular or other tissues, like chicken breast or a steak or something like that, we're consuming creatine phosphate. We need to break that down. And when we break it down, we get creatinine as our metabolic breakdown product. And we have to dispose of that. If you've ever gotten a blood test done, and you see on the blood test, you'll see the acronym BUN. BUN stands for blood urea nitrogen. And we use it clinically to assess renal function, to see if your kidneys are doing what they're supposed to be doing. If your blood urea nitrogen is high, that means you're not disposing of the nitrogenous wastes the way you're supposed to, and it could mean that you have decreased kidney function. And if your kidneys are failing, you're in big trouble. Using the control of urine production, the kidneys regulate how much water we excrete or conserve. In doing so, they control how much watery plasma is in our blood. And that's what we call our blood volume. The more blood plasma we have, the higher our blood volume is. We need to maintain our fluid balance, and because the kidneys determine how much water we're going to get rid of and how much water we're going to keep, we can help control and regulate our fluid balance using the urinary system. Because volume and pressure are related to each other, we can also control our blood pressure and the percentage of our body's fluids that are made up of solutes. That's what we call our osmolarity. So if we are going to get rid of a lot of solutes, if our blood plasma is very highly concentrated, then we're going to have more solutes in the urine because our kidneys are going to work to get rid of those solutes. And then your urine will be highly concentrated. Also, by maintaining our solute and fluid conservation, we can control the pressure in our blood vessels. Now, if we control the excretion and conservation of ions like sodium ions, potassium ions, calcium ions, hydrogen ions, and others, the kidneys help to regulate our electrolyte balance and help control the pH levels of our body fluids. So hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions, they're going to be directly related to the acidity or alkalinity of our body's fluids. So the kidneys can decide how much we conserve and how much we get rid of, so that we can also control our pH levels. Now, we take medications and we also produce hormones. So we have a chemical balance we need to control in our bodies as well. So we can break down hormones that we produce that are circulating through our blood that we're no longer using, and medications and drugs that we consume or we ingest. We can break those down into different molecules and then release them through our urinary system. We call that clearance. And that's another function of the urinary system. Now, those functions I already mentioned, they're all dependent upon urine production. But there's also functions that are independent of urine production. There are some hormones that the kidneys secrete, like erythropoietin. If you might remember from episodes on the blood, that erythropoietin is the hormone that stimulates red blood cell production, otherwise known as erythropoiesis. Also, if you remember the episodes from the bone tissue from our skeletal discussions, you'll remember that the kidneys also synthesize calcitriol, the active form of vitamin D. They assist in the synthesis of calcitriol. They're one of the steps, and that helps maintain calcium homeostasis and regulate bone metabolism. Now, sometimes molecules get damaged in our bodies, and the resultant molecules that form from the broken down molecules are unstable. And we call those free radicals. And they're normal. They're normal results from metabolism. But they can damage our normal molecules like DNA, proteins, and lipids. So our kidneys help to neutralize those unstable free radicals to help protect our tissues from damage. Now, we know that glucose is our main source of energy. We break down glucose to produce ATP. Well, sometimes we use other sources. Sometimes we have to take proteins or lipids and use them for energy as well. And what we can do is we can convert them into glucose. We can synthesize glucose from non-carbohydrate sources like amino acids from proteins. When blood sugar is really low, like starvation time, we can engage in a process called gluconeogenesis, which means we're going to provide an alternate source of blood glucose. Gluco for glucose, neo for new, and genesis for the creation. So the creation of new glucose, gluconeogenesis. So you can see that the kidneys are going to have a lot of different functions, a lot of them based in urine production and urine production itself, but also some that are not based in urine production. They just mostly assist other organ systems in their functions. We have two kidneys, a left and a right. The kidneys are retroperitoneal, which means they exist posterior to the peritoneum, not inside the peritoneal cavity like most of the small intestine and the stomach and things like that. Each kidney has 3 vessels emerging from its medial surface. That's the surface facing the spine. If you look at the medial surface, you'll see that it's indented. The kidney looks like a bean. That indentation is called the renal hilum. And the vessels that are coming from that renal hilum are the renal artery, which brings blood into the kidney, the renal vein, which brings blood out of the kidney, and the ureter. The ureter is the vessel that carries urine from the kidney to the urinary bladder. Since the ureter travels inferiorly, you can see the superior and inferior aspects of the kidney by looking for the ureter. Since the renal vein is typically found anterior to the renal artery, you can ascertain that you're looking at the anterior of the kidney when the renal vein is closer to you than the renal artery is. And then again, since the renal hilum is on the medial surface, you can know medial from lateral.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com and use code AUDIO for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com and use code AUDIO at checkout.
The kidney is supported and protected by 3 layers of tissue, connective tissue specifically, between the peritoneum and the kidney. The most superficial layer is the renal fascia. It adheres the kidney to the muscles of the posterior abdominal cavity. Contained within the renal fascia is the perirenal fat capsule, which surrounds the kidney, giving it physical stability and protection. And then the outer surface of the organ itself has a fibrous covering like a shrink-wrapped cut of meat called the fibrous renal capsule, and it protects the kidney from infection and provides a little extra cushion to its surface. Each kidney is about the size of your fist, and they're located around T12 to L3 vertebral segment. Now, the left kidney in most people is a little bit higher than the right kidney, and the reason is because on the right side you have your liver. So the right kidney is a little bit further down because the liver is in the way. And that's why it can't be at the same height as the left kidney. If you look at the inside of the kidney, the best way to really examine it is with a coronal or frontal section. So we're going to talk about it in that way. So I will post images of the coronal section of the kidney so you can see the kidney divided up into anterior and posterior portions. The coronal section still lets us see the renal hilum, and just inside of it is a structure called the renal pelvis. The renal pelvis gives way to the ureter. And remember, the ureter carries the urine to the urinary bladder. From a coronal section, you can see the internal features of the kidney really well. We'll start talking about the major regions. Just deep to the fibrous renal capsule is the outer shell of the kidney called the renal cortex. Deep to the cortex is the center portion, which we call the renal medulla. This follows the pattern that we see throughout the human body, where the external or superficial shell is called the cortex, while the internal portion is called the medulla. We saw it with the adrenal glands, we saw it with the thymus, we saw it even with the bones. Our long bones in the diaphysis have a cortex and a medullary cavity, medulla. These regions of the kidney have what's called the renal parenchyma. The word parenchyma means the functional tissue of an organ. It's a general term. And the functional units of the kidney are the ones that produce urine, and we call those nephrons. And that's where they're found, in the cortex and medulla of the kidney. Nephrons are microscopic, so you're not going to see them in a gross section. But we can see them in illustrations. You're also going to see in the coronal section these triangular structures that the medulla is divided into. And in reality, they're not really triangles, they're more like pyramids because they're three-dimensional. So we call them the renal pyramids. The apex of each pyramid, meaning the singular point, is called the renal papilla, and it points toward the renal hilum and renal pelvis. Between the renal pyramids are structures called the renal columns. Now, when urine is produced by the nephrons, it flows through tiny tubules that travel to the renal papilla. Each renal pyramid's papilla terminates in a funnel-like space called the minor calyx, and that collects the urine from the nephron. Minor calyces from adjacent renal pyramids unite to form larger sections called a major calyx. And multiple major calyces unite to form that renal pelvis. The space between the calyces is called the renal sinus. Sometimes when you get a dissection specimen, you'll see that it's been injected with a colored substance like wax or latex. Usually they will inject arteries with red latex and veins with blue latex. And that kind of helps us identify some of the renal vasculature, or if it was a fetal pig, just general vasculature. All right, since so much blood goes through the kidneys so quickly, we're going to talk about the renal blood flow as the last thing we do for this episode. So let's start with the renal artery. Blood comes into each kidney via its own renal artery. Remember, there's a left and a right kidney, so that means there's going to be a left and a right renal artery. Each renal artery comes off of the abdominal aorta. In the renal pelvis, the renal arteries branch into segmental arteries. The segmental arteries approach the renal pyramids, where they then branch into interlobar arteries. And they travel through the renal columns, which, remember, are the spaces between the renal pyramids. Now think about the renal pyramids as lobes of the kidney. So that's why we call those arteries interlobar arteries. Interlobar meaning between the lobes. The interlobar arteries then split in a way that each branch serves the renal pyramid on its own side. So you have a segmental artery branching into an interlobar artery. That interlobar artery going up between two pyramids, it then splits or bifurcates into two arteries, one heading to one pyramid, the other heading to the adjacent pyramid. Each one then arches around the base of the renal pyramid, which is on the cortex side, as what's called the arcuate artery, meaning it makes an arch. Straight arteries then radiate from the arcuate arteries into the renal cortex. So little tiny branches coming off of the arcuate arteries into the renal cortex. We call those the cortical radiate arteries. Cortical radiate. They radiate into the cortex. As we look deeper into the kidney tissue, we will see that each kidney's parenchyma consists of over 1 million functional units called nephrons. Nephrons are the structures to which the blood is being carried. Emerging from the cortical radiate arteries are several arterioles heading to a round mass of capillaries called the glomerulus. This is a portal system. This is a different type of blood flow. Instead of going arterial, capillary, venal, we go arterial, capillary, arterial again, then capillaries again, then venules. So because the kidneys are going to filter blood and then have to reabsorb plasma, we're going to need two sets of capillaries. One that is going to take blood plasma and filter it out into the nephron so we can determine how much of it becomes urine. And then another set of capillaries that needs to reabsorb the interstitial fluid from the kidneys back into the bloodstream. So we have this round mass of capillaries called the glomerulus. We have an arteriole leading into the glomerulus. We call that the afferent arteriole. Then the glomerulus is a ball of capillaries, and then those capillaries converge back into an efferent arteriole. Remember from the nervous system that afferent means incoming and efferent means outgoing. Once again, that glomerulus is where blood plasma is filtered out into the urine-producing nephron. But we'll come back to that in another episode when we talk about urine production. Let's go back to the efferent arterioles. So the efferent arteriole comes out of the glomerular capillaries, and depending on where those capillaries are, they are either going to lead to what we call peritubular capillaries, which are capillaries that are found around the tubules of the nephron, or the vasorecta. Peritubular capillaries are in the renal cortex, and the vasorecta is in the renal medulla. The nephrons that are closest to and extend deepest into the renal medulla are called juxtamedullary nephrons because they're in the medulla. The rest are called cortical nephrons. The vast majority of efferent arterioles lead to peritubular capillaries. So the peritubular capillaries and the vasorecta reabsorb the water and solutes that were filtered from the blood into the glomerular capillaries and eventually make their way into the interstitial fluid of the kidney tissue. The vasorecta and peritubular capillaries bring blood into the cortical radiate veins. The cortical radiate veins accompany the cortical radiate arteries. They lead to the arcuate veins, which go around the base of the pyramids, the interlobar veins, and then finally the renal vein, which drains blood into the inferior vena cava of the abdominal cavity on its way back to the right atrium of the heart. Notice that something's missing. When you compare arterial flow with venous flow, there's no segmental vein. We just skip that part. So we go from interlobar right to the renal vein. Whereas for the arteries, we go renal artery to segmental first. There are no segmental veins. All right, so that is the blood flow through the kidney. Remember, the reason we're bringing so much blood into the kidney every minute is because we're filtering that blood plasma so that we can regulate how many solutes or how much of the solutes we keep, how much get put into urine, and regulate how much water we keep and how much water becomes urine. All right, I think that's enough for this episode. Thank you so much to my guest, Dr. Michael L. Kaufman. Again, you can find him on michaellkaufman.com, and that's where you can find ways to order his book, if you're interested, called Doing Good and Doing Well. I appreciate all the comments that you've been making on Spotify and the other podcast services, as well as the emails that I've been getting. I got an email recently from someone that said they are studying biochemistry at the University of Zurich in Switzerland, and they use the podcast to study for an A&P exam. I'm really glad that the podcast is helping you. So that was Peter at the University of Zurich in Switzerland. Thank you, Peter, for reaching out. I really do appreciate it. I've also got another email from Ben from the United Kingdom, who is studying to do a level 2 fitness instructor program. And anatomy and physiology is a big course for them. And it sounds like the podcast is really helping Ben to achieve the goal of becoming a level 2 fitness instructor in the United Kingdom. So thanks again for reaching out. I really do appreciate all of that. It is fun to hear back from people who are listening to the podcast. The next episodes, we will continue on with the urinary system until we get finished with it, and then we will move on. I hope this podcast is helping you get your B or better in A&P, and I'll talk to you next time. Anatomy and Physiology Bit by Bit is a production of Minus 55 Media. Please take the time to rate the podcast and leave a review. You can also check out the content I post on Instagram and YouTube as @StudentHelp4AP. That's Student Help, the number 4, AP. Special thanks to my family, Bucks County Community College, and McGraw-Hill Education, where you can find Anatomy and Physiology Digital Suite, my low-cost tutor video-based digital learning solution for anatomy and physiology currently being used at several colleges and universities.